quick. You might be offended severely and try to withdraw the clap a little bit later. What is nice about the previous speakers that I've listened to was that they all had some form of expertise in a particular area, and most of you didn't know anything about it, and a few could engage because they knew something about it, but generally you learn from them. The problem with talking politics is everybody is a bloody expert. There's nothing I say today that will surprise you, that you never heard before. You might disagree with me. I'm sure Dave Stewart will disagree with everything. Leon Lowe will disagree with everything I say. I was utterly surprised, pleasantly surprised, when Francis Kendall this morning gave a paper which I 100% agree with. That is such a rare feat. And I think that also might be possibly the last time she agreed with me. In any case, I'm curious about in South Africa about this balance that exists, or that we grapple with, between liberationism and call it liberalism, and some of you might find even liberalism rather despicable because you are libertarians, which could be, in layman's terms, say slightly more to the right, if you wish. I was surprised this morning when I read in the local rag there here somewhere in town, and it says the Suidlanders, they're around and they're looking for a piece of land here, so they want to establish themselves here in this particular area. And then while I was having lunch today, a libertarian said to me, we are traveling around, we're looking for a piece of land. I said, are you also a member of the Suidlanders? I said, of course, yes. So suddenly there's this overlay, which makes me nervous. I feel like what's that guy who was in the lion's den? I feel rather lonely here. And this morning she said to me that if I disagree with Leon Lowe, it's because I'm wrong. So, okay. So I work from the assumption, and I could be wrong, and I would like to engage this. I'm going to speak for another 20 minutes, and then I would like to see, because I'm sure Leon and Dave and a lot of you will have a lot to say. I work from the assumption that the 1994 to 1996 agreement in South Africa was a sort of a compromise in the absence of consensus about the greater good and regime that should represent all South Africans, or that should precede the idea of a democracy in South Africa. No consensus. So whatever we did was a form of a compromise. And you could look at it as a form of a compromise between black nationalism and call it white nationalism, if you wish. And the compromise, in some weird way, which, if you told me that 5 years before, 1994, say around about 85, and you ask me where will black nationalism and white nationalism meet each other, I will not have said a liberal democratic constitution. So no, that's not possible. Either side is a zero-sum contest. Either side is going to win. We will either have a socialist system or we will have more apartheid-style repression. But you cannot, there's no room for an agreement in the middle, for a compromise in the middle. But lo and behold, there was this compromise, a liberal democratic constitution. And the thing about a compromise is, it will be renegotiated again. Otherwise, it would have been consensus. All compromises are renegotiated when new, strong contenders enter the fray or the political sphere, or when conditions change such that the balance between these forces is disturbed, then they tend to start renegotiating, or there's always a force trying to renegotiate the original compromise. And I think there were numerous instances where we tried to reach, or somebody tried to reach, to renegotiate the original compromise. But I think the one that you might be more familiar with is the political urge amongst a section of the ANC, if you wish, to change Section 25 of the Constitution. And the EFF, who entered the political scene, they weren't there in 1994. They now here, they are a strong, destructive force, and they threaten the system. They threaten the compromise, and they seek to enter the narrative and change the rules of the political game. But it is because it's a compromise, it was bound to happen, and it's exactly where we are now. So I want to use one or two examples that I think will explain the balance of this compromise and call it a pendulum that swings between liberationism and liberalism, if you wish. So one evening, Dan Crick from Agri SA phoned me. He said, Piet, if you sit across the president, what will you say to him? I said, then it depends what you're talking about. He said, no, man, fuck. Talking about land reform now. What will you say to him? I said, I will say to him, listen, Mr. President, have you noticed for 300 years, and especially so the last 50 or more years, white people stole black people's land? He said, sorry, Pete, let me just rephrase my question. Obviously, you misunderstood me. Because I'm not going to say that. First of all, I don't believe that. And secondly, Agri-SA will fire me if I say that. So it's not going to happen. I said to him, Dan, if you want to reach a compromise, you need to reach an area in the middle somewhere. Because, okay, now we have a platform that you can work with. Let's assume that 1994 compromise, 1996 constitution really put both parties on a platform from which they were better off eventually. A compromise is not a zero-sum contest. It's quite possible for both parties, if there's only two parties, that both of them might be better off. So you want to reach a platform where you'll be better off because white South Africans really took advantage of the democratic regime and they became relatively wealthy. They, three or four generations of middle class, was born as a consequence of that. And really, white South Africans took like a duck to water to democracy. The identity in South Africa that was really better off because of democracy was actually the white people. They wouldn't have believed it in the 1980s, but democracy stood them in good stead. And even black South Africans are much better off. So it was that compromise was a form of a platform which everybody was better off. So then, if you want to reach a compromise, a new compromise, because remember the regime rules are up for negotiation again. You'll have to reach some form of consensus or some form of a compromise, and then based on that, you can renegotiate the rules of the game, because it's inevitable. The rules of the game will be renegotiated now. He said, but I'm not going to say we stole the land. I said, okay, Dan, but then there's nothing else I can say to you, except tell the president I say hello. So Rolf Meyer told it to me, and Dan confessed to it later publicly. He said, so when they actually meet, it was on this day that David Mabuza invited the CEO of Agri-SA to Morimole, and Dan Crick got a call from the president saying he must fly down to Cape Town to meet the president. And they sat across from each other at the table, and Dan said, even before the meeting started, Dan said to the president, Mr. President, I would like you to know that, that we take responsibility for the injustices of the past. And the president put his pen down and he said to him, do you really mean that? And that was my experience too. If I tell the black people that there's enough white people that will confess, yeah, we did steal the land, then it's a surprise to them. And the president was, after all these years of dealing with Rolf Meyer and a whole range of liberal whites, he was still surprised that maybe just because we came from organized agriculture, somebody said, yes, okay, good, there was an injustice, and we take some responsibility for that. And to this day, Dan is a bit of the president likes him a lot. He thinks he's somebody that he can deal with, and he also said so to Rolf Meyer. And when, after he appointed his panel to investigate or to research Section 25 of the Constitution and the land debate, he phoned Dan again and he said to him, listen, man, the panel's going to present their report to Cabinet today or tomorrow. I would like you to come and present your report, because Dan has since developed a minority report, which he later changed his mind about, saying it's not a minority report, it's just an alternative report. Because a minority report, there's something about a ring from the past which could disturb the debate. And Dan was quite wise, so he changed it to an alternative report. But in any case, he went there and I found him afterwards and he said to me, they were extremely polite with him. They asked him a few good questions, thanked him for the report, and the president assured him that his report, the panel report, and the Motlanthe report, he sees them all on the same footing. All of them will be considered when they eventually think about changing the Constitution. And they will change the Constitution. There are still people who think that they will not change the Constitution. They will change the Constitution. And the big debate is, in terms of this compromise, how do we reorganize this compromise about land ownership in South Africa? The question is, because remember, at the ANC's conference, leadership conference, they said there must be expropriation without compensation. And that expression falls into the conceptual realm of there was an injustice, somebody's land must be taken and it must be given to somebody who it belonged to in the past. So it played on the notion of an injustice. It was about the rearrangement of justice. And the argument was that in 1994, the compromise that we reached, in some other way, did not make provision. There were other more important things, and we didn't really consider affecting justice again, rebalancing the injustice of the past. And the Constitution as it is, my friend Elmine du Plessis, professor at Northeast University, tells me, makes provision for redistribution or for expropriation with nil compensation. In other words, you can get nothing for your farm. They can decide you own the land bank some money or that you stole the land. There might be all sorts of heuristic reasons why they take your land and give you nothing for it, not a cent. But there's a legal process behind it. And all the other principles of the Constitution still apply. Amongst them, the one that says that in terms of our international agreements and arrangements, we have to consider, the law must consider that in expropriation of land. But there's a legal process behind null compensation. Of course, if you say without compensation, it means you just take the land. Then it's just about justice. The other one is not only about justice, it is also an effort to balance the notion of justice legally, not creating another injustice in the process as a consequence. The ANC has a serious problem here, especially the president, because he has said many times in Parliament, expropriation without compensation. But that's not possible. It is not possible to change the Constitution unless you, in some other way, will also transgress other principles in the Constitution, and you will run into all sorts of problems with international law. So the president knows, and the ANC by now, some of them got the message that you cannot expropriate without compensation. But remember, that's a resolution of the conference. So if the president now wants to convince the ANC that he has reached a new compromise with white nationalists, he reached a new compromise with organized agriculture in South Africa, he must convince the ANC, either the NEC or the policy conference or the elective conference, convince them that nil compensation and no compensation, it sounds different, but it's the same thing. And he will lie to the ANC if he says that, because it's not the same thing. And even though the policy conference did not say that we will expropriate, we will change the Constitution, it's not possible to change no compensation or without compensation into null compensation and conform to the policy resolution of the ANC. So the president, I know, is busy lying to a large number of people around him, and certainly to members of the ANC, and even perhaps to members of the National Executive Committee in the ANC. And one of the reasons why I know that he knows he's lying is around about the day or two after he spoke to Dan Creek. He went to Alexandra, and he stood there and he said to the people of Alexandra, I will broaden, I want to extend land ownership to more people, to everybody. I want to broaden ownership. And nobody really noticed it almost. The media didn't make much of it. But to my ears, it was one of the biggest concessions I've heard the ANC making in a very, very long time, because I've dealt with Minister Nkwinti for a long time. You couldn't bribe him to convince him that black South Africa should own land. You couldn't bribe him. He had a simple story he told me. He said, listen, man, if we give land ownership to black people, tomorrow white people will come and buy the land, and in 5 or 10 years' time, white people will own all the land again, and then they will have a reason why they own it. Then you can't say they stole it because now they bought it from us. It's a simple argument. I said, but why don't you build in a regulation that if you, for instance, if you're black and you own land, you can only sell it to black people again? Why don't you just try to regulate it? No. This idea that black people should own land is a white plot. They're just trying to convince us, talk us into a system which eventually will make it impossible for us to really redistribute land. So this agreement that I think Ramaphosa has reached in his head, that he still has to convince most of the ANC, and I think in 2 years' time, or 2-3 years' time, there's another leadership conference. He must stand again for the presidency of the ANC. This thing might come back to haunt him. It's quite possible that Ace Magashule is not in jail, which I think he will be in jail. But if he's not in jail, if he can muster some form of support in the National Executive Committee, around about 50% or 40%, they might ask him again about this thing. Did you expropriate land without compensation? And we'll have to say, no, I didn't. So, okay, good. Then you've broken a conference resolution and you can't be president anymore, and they will use it against him. It's quite possible that he might even lose a conference or a leadership election because of that. But he's between a rock and a hard place. It's not possible to expropriate without compensation. He knows that. He's made up his mind about it. The land panel has also changed their mind. When they started out, they all talked about as if this injustice that has to be rectified. And then somewhere in their recommendations, in their report, suddenly there was this slight narrative shift, which allowed for other means and ways to also do the thing. So that is one area where I see that the ANC, the liberationist narrative, and the pendulum is swinging a little bit away. Call it to the liberal democratic narrative, if you wish. I hate the word narrative, but it's the only way to explain it now. There are other ways as well that I see. Tito Mboweni, one day I loitered around Lutuli House. And I asked him, so why the meeting that is on this day, regularly, the president and the top 6, they meet somewhere there, and then they often also meet unions and the Communist Party, and then they meet all sorts of meetings that the president have and the top 6 have, the people come in. So it's quite often it's a long day, whole day meeting there. But why is this meeting, when I come here, I don't see the meeting anymore. No, the president is in Pretoria for a very important meeting. So what meeting is that? No, the meeting is going on for some time now. The president is there, Tito Mboweni is there, delegation from Treasury is there, and then also Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor, and the World Bank. They have a meeting. Same meeting, same day of the week, for some time. So what is the meeting about? Apparently, Tito Mboweni said, he sent out a message to the World Bank, which then distributed further, that, guys, the medium-term policy comes up at the end of October, and in November, you guys decide whether we should be downgraded or not. What does it take not to be downgraded? And they have this meeting. And that, I think, 70-plus pages report that Tito Mboweni released sort of as him and Treasury's plan was conceived as a consequence of those meetings. So Tito Mboweni has got a big problem, because that plan is a liberal democratic type of plan. Most of the people that come out in support of Tito Mboweni's plan should be the natural enemies of the liberationist discourse, should in some other way feel alienated or alienate the ANC and its tripartite partners. It's not the typical discourse of the ANC and of the liberation movement. There's a shift there. And this shift seems to be, it might be a shift or arrangement between political elites within the ANC. And the National Executive Committee hesitantly, in some other way, bought into the idea. But it's more like, when Al Capone said, I think other people may have said it too, he said, you get a lot farther with a kind word and a gun than you get with a kind word alone. So Tito Mboweni apparently went to the NEC and he toned it down. He toned it down and he used language that in some other way don't alienate his audience. And he said to them, listen, we have a gun to the head. What we have, we can't afford. What's going on in your minds, we also can't afford. Liberationist theory in some other way must stop here. We don't have a choice. And it was a difficult thing. Somebody SMS'd me from inside the meeting, says, the first time that Tony Ngeni didn't say a word. And he was usually, even though he's completely discredited, one of the front men arguing all sorts of Ace Magashule type of arguments. But on that day, it was as if there was this hush, quietness, uncertainty. So what the hell are we going to do? And eventually they had to say something, so it's a more reserved and perhaps a more appropriated final report, which I think was probably written by Andries Nel. Because the English was just much better. It was typical Afrikaans English, which is as bad as mine, but it was much better than the English of the ANC. And it was the longest report I've ever seen, I think around about 9 pages. It's as if there was reason for an elaborate explanation here. And if you look at all the analysts, everybody, each and every analyst could find some reason or some points in that thing to confirm what they want to sell to the public. I said, well, I see a clear ideological shift here away from, say, liberationism to a form of pragmatism. Not necessarily as far as liberal democratic type of regime thinking, but certainly to a form of pragmatism. And I wrote an article in the Vrye Weekblad saying, that's the best you can expect from the ANC. You cannot expect them to become liberals. And that's why I agree with the idea of this epigenetic intergenerational transfer of an institutional type of condition which the ANC and the liberation movement cannot become liberals. That's why the DA is in such big trouble. You will not sell liberalism to black South Africans. Stop trying that. Find another thing to sell to them. You're not going to sell liberalism to them. Tony Leon will not sell his liberalism to the ANC. He will not, black South Africans won't vote for it. Colored South Africans vote for it as a form of a compromise because they're caught up in the middle between black and white nationalism. But they can leave, and they leave to some of them leave to the ACDP, for instance. And the Afrikaners, I can tell Helen Zille now, if she thinks she's going to get them back, you make a mistake, they went home. They're not coming back to the DA. Gwedi Mantashe one day asked me if I can write him a report, what will it take for the ANC to get Afrikaners to vote for him? I said, but I can give you one sentence for that. I don't have to write you a report. You're going to pay me a lot of money now, I know, but I can tell you in one sentence what it will take. He said, okay, what will it take? I said, all you have to do is govern fair and govern well. There's nothing more than that. Just remember, the Afrikaners are not liberals. They hide at the DA from you. There is very little room in South Africa for liberalism. There's very little support for liberalism. Amongst Afrikaners, there's almost no support for liberalism. And black South Africans do not vote for a liberal party. And those that do vote are puppets. I don't doubt it for a moment. They get salaries. And I spoke to a group of colored Afrikaans-speaking people in the Western Cape a few months ago, and I told them, the only reason why you belong to this group and probably vote for the DA is because you never worked for anything but an Afrikaner. You always got your salary from them. Your DNA is not that of liberals. So if you reach an agreement in South Africa, it's not going to be liberalism. It will be something else. And that's why I make the point that if I'm the DA, I will move to a social democracy. That is something that you can lie about to black South Africans in the same way that the president will lie about to black South Africans, telling them that no compensation and no compensation is the same thing, and they will believe you because sometimes they want to believe you. So you have, in some other way, to find in the middle somewhere where the pendulum swings between liberalism and liberationism, you'll have to find a territory in the middle. And the libertarians, I'm afraid, they're almost like the people in Urania. They live in their own headspace. They might romanticize about it. They might even dream about it. And it might sound lovely. But yeah, man, reality is a long way from there. In the same way that reality in South Africa is a long way from liberalism. 4 white people contesting a position in the DA, all of them liberals, to varying degrees. Do you think black South Africans will vote for them? No, it's never going to happen. And the colours are leaving, and the Afrikaners is gone. The party is in Muren. And why? because liberalism doesn't have a marketing value. Get rid of the idea. It's not going to work. So the president and the ANC, I think, has moved in a number of anecdotal evidence that they've moved a little bit in an effort to find sort of a new compromise. Because the compromise in 1994 has become obsolete. We will renegotiate it. Not incomplete, but parts of it will be renegotiated. And we are so close to getting somebody that is not prepared to negotiate with us. I can tell you now, if Dlamini Zuma won the party leadership at Nasrec, there will have been no room for negotiating a compromise. It would have been enforced. It will have been enforced. And just imagine for yourself, just take Ramaphosa out of the equation, and maybe you don't like him, but as a form of a compromise between black and white, as a form of a compromise between liberty and liberationism, just take him out of the equation. Take Tito Mboweni out of the equation. Then you see what is left of the ANC. It is a dying party. And if you think the ANC is not prepared to pull this whole country under the waves, you make a big mistake. They're quite prepared to do that. To change their minds in a form of an elite compromise takes an incredibly difficult balancing act. Tito Mboweni, the only reason why he goes in like a stormram and say, this is what we have to do, is because he couldn't care less if they tomorrow tell him he must resign. He doesn't have any political ambitions. He's got nothing to lose. He can raise the stakes as high as he wants to. And quite frankly, I don't think he feels that deep affinity to please the ANC leadership too. He's got a form of informal arrangement with Ramaphosa. Come and do it, but I think it was Van Sy Slabbert that talked about the ambulance job. I don't think it was him. Come and do an ambulance job for me. And the president himself doesn't buy into what Tito Mboweni has manufactured together with the World Bank. He's more of a liberationist type of headspace. Tito Mboweni is more of a pragmatist. So liberalism and liberationism will meet each other in the new compromise in the sphere of pragmatism. We will never be a complete liberal democratic state again. We will always slightly move to what's called pragmatism. And then we must hope it provides us with a better platform, a more solid platform, and that we'll all be better off. And the other night, lastly, I spoke to Flip Buys. I don't know, maybe you don't know Flip Buys. He's from Solidarity. And Flip gets very angry when I call him a right-wing, but let's call him conservative, and very conservative. So when we arrived there, the people at Cape Net, all these lip-tart, lefty type of gay society operating there, they thought that Piet Croucamp would say, we are patriots, we stay in this country till death. And they thought Flip Buys would say, guys, they're going to really ruin this country for us. We must prepare ourselves for inevitable, we might have to leave. And Flip came there and Flip said, listen man, we're going to set up institutions. We're going to dig ourselves in. We're going to stay here. We're going to create little spaces where we live freely and where we can live, we can impose our particular values on that particular space. So we're digging in for the long haul. I said, that is completely wrong. That's one way of one generation using their own political agenda, holding captive the next generation. That's what you want to do. You want to keep the young people here in South Africa. You put up universities, put up Afrikaans schools, because you want to keep them here so that they can justify your political agenda. You don't want them to go. It will undermine your own security here, your own future here. So you want to hold captive the next generation. The right headspace for young people is they must leave. And if they stay because it's a choice that they make. But people who so easily can adapt to the free market type of societies which the liberal democratic constitution allowed us in 1996, people who can adapt to change so easily as this particular group that find comfort in the liberal type of constitution, their headspace is one of being nomadic. They're going somewhere else. They're in the Darwinian team. They will go somewhere where they're more comfortable. They will adapt to change. They will leave South Africa in droves, not because they hate the country, sometimes they might not even have a political argument, but because opportunities will always be somewhere else. That's the very nature of the open mind, is to migrate where the conditions are more suitable for the reproduction of your own existence. That's why the kids must leave. Let them go. What did the Bible say, Pharaoh? Let my children go. Let the children go. And eventually, in South Africa, I can say it with a great deal of certainty, there will be pioneers left, hardcore libertarians might hang around in Kleinseer. Somewhere in Urania, there might be still a power man with gumboots on and fighting it out and slugging it out. But those with open minds and the rest of us will have spread all over the world, because that's what open mind people do. They go somewhere else. So the new compromise that we reach now, make yourself used to the term, it will not be a liberal democratic constitution. Our constitution will be under threat, will be under pressure to change all the time, because the compromise of 1994 is busy being renegotiated, and there will be more pressure on us to renegotiate it. And eventually, what we will have is the survival of the pragmatists. So now, Dave, yes, what can you say?
Okay,
yes.
So not everybody at once, we only have 2 mics. I'm going to go, okay, you were, I agreed to do the other day, so you can go first. Thank you, we're in your time now, so it's up to you.
Piet, thank you for the presentation, but I just want to say to you, I have turn on the mic. Can you hear me now?
Go with this one.
Can you hear me now?
I will repeat your question.
It is on.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, I just want to say I've got an issue with you saying that libertarians live in a dream world.
Okay.
If you haven't noticed, the world outside South Africa is against the tide, but freedom is progressing in the rest of the world. We are much freer in other parts of the world than we've been 10, 20 years ago. So Africa might be against the tide, but freedom at the end of the day is going to win the battle. And our allies are things like the internet, like Bitcoin, which are really going to help us to get rid of politicians and governments. And because the world is sick of politicians that doesn't keep their promises, the world is sick of governments that cannot produce. So it's a worldwide trend, an evolution, a revolution if you want to call it that. And South Africa is going to follow.
Yeah, I have no doubt. And that is the wonderful thing about this country. Somebody that's so wrong like he is, he can still be right too. Because I think he's right in some ways. I think ultimately, artificial intelligence and new technologies and the way that the economy will be structured in the future will ultimately set a lot of people free. It will set those free with a well-consolidated demographic dividend, who have access to capital, access to assets, good scholarly experience, good health and those things. Those will be more free than anybody else. And you guys look like them. So let me grant you that. But unfortunately, it's not a principle that you can apply universally. Some people will be more free than others, in the same way that some people are more equal than others now. Yes, we were. Yeah.
I do not understand. I do not understand the semantic difference that you've drawn between. I do not understand the semantic difference that you sought to draw between the phrase "without compensation" and "zero or nil compensation."
Yeah.
To my way of thinking, those are semantic differences, but there is no real difference in principle between the two. The one is the same as the other. What is the difference that you're trying to draw?
Unless I think over the last few months, a lot of lawyers have discussed this thing extensively. And I follow the debate, the legal debate all the time. If you say, I will expropriate without compensation, it is that we want to redress the injustice of the past, we want to take your farm, and we want to give it to somebody else. That's expropriation without compensation. It doesn't stipulate the conditions that will prevail after your land has been taken. Your land will be taken, and remember what was the mindset at the conference. There was a massive injustice. White people, especially farmers, white farmers, sit with all the land and we have nothing. They stole it from us. So that was the narrative, and based on that narrative, say, we will expropriate land without compensation. In other words, we will take your land. We want to change. They didn't say change the constitution, but the ANC in Parliament immediately said, let's change the constitution, because the EFF encouraged them to do it. So we now know that we have added the extra part which says we want to change the constitution to make it possible, because they know that it's not possible to just take the land under the current constitution. You cannot just take it. There are many provisions in the constitution which it must be universally acceptable, it must be in the general interest. I think it's, I stand to be corrected, but I think it's 23(2) of the Constitution, which says that international law and international agreements must be taken into consideration by the courts, etc. So they cannot expropriate the land without compensation. But they can expropriate it at nil compensation, which means they can say, yes, the land belongs to you, and yes, we will go to court, and we will formulate an expropriation law, and that law will comply with the Constitution. And in terms of that law, there are very specific conditions under which we can pay you nothing for the land. But you can go to court, and they will see whether we have complied with the law and complied with the Constitution. Very specific conditions. For instance, if you owe the land bank, say your farm is worth 10 million, you owe the land bank 10 million, we say we take your farm, we give it to black South Africans, you in any case owe the land bank 10 million, so we don't owe you money for that. There are other ways too. For instance, they say if you don't live on your farm and you live in Germany somewhere and your workers farmed the farm for the last 10 years. So, okay, you're not here, we can take that. So, very specific conditions, but you can still go to court. And they must still explain in terms of which law and which part of the Constitution have they expropriated your land. But expropriation without compensation, what they want to do is to say, we don't have to explain to you. The explanation lies in the fact that you stole the land. And legally, say again?
Why do you say it means that? I don't understand the logic.
Okay, I have my limits in explanation. I try, but what I can do is I'll get your email address and I'll send you stuff to people who've written about it legally, about the laws about it. And I'm just telling you what the narrative is, and that's exactly how they explain it.
Of the political insiders who are negotiating for this result.
Yeah, you could look at it. All these changes are always a conversation between political elites. Most people don't understand it and don't know what's going on. They just follow an ideology to some degree.
But just to clarify my own thinking, is the position that in both cases, whether it's without compensation or whether it's nil compensation, there would have to be an amendment of the Constitution?
No, nil compensation. Well, from the lawyers that I understand this, you don't have to change the Constitution. As it is now, the Constitution makes provision for nil compensation, they say. It does not make provision for no compensation.
But why, if the Constitution already introduces that concept, why make an issue of it?
Because the argument goes that if you stole my land, argument's sake, why do I have to pay you now to get the land back? Why do you have any political rights or any rights that you can claim? I would just give back the bloody land that you stole. So it reflects on the idea of justice, redress of justice. Now, you might not agree with it, but that is a very dominant opinion within the ANC. Okay.
So we have to move on. I don't think this is the debate, but we have to move on, of course, as a law man.
Okay.
Piet, jy is heeltemal reg, ek stem nie met jou saam nie.
Mooi.
Firstly, it's true that there are quite a lot of South Africans who can and will emigrate under the right circumstances. But a lot of South Africans can't emigrate. They don't have the money, and a lot of South Africans don't have the inclination. We'd much rather stay here fight to defend our constitution, negotiate with the ANC, but keep our roots here in South Africa and work together with other South Africans to build a just society. So that, I think, is the challenge that we have. What is your response?
Yeah, first of all, me and you, Dave, you know how old we are. That's our strategy because we don't have a choice. Nobody wants us. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about your children and your grandchildren. I'm not saying all of them will immigrate, all of them must immigrate. But I think you do your children a disservice if you don't allow them the headspace, you don't give them the skills, the education, the dividend that they may need to make a decision whether they want to stay or not. Because let me tell you this, the next 5 years is going to be a hard slog. If you think the ANC can't give birth to a despot, you make a big mistake. It can turn out really, really, really nasty here. So I say to my children, I don't care what you do, but when you're done with your studies, I want you to have the option to stay or to go. I just think it's incredibly unfair to put your child in an Afrikaans school, to put him in the Afrikaans university, because you say, we must be rooted here. I don't think, neither you nor me can predict the future of South Africa to the extent that it will be fair to entrap our children in South Africa. And that goes for America too. If I lived in America today, I would also tell you, you better make your plans to go somewhere else, because if Donald Trump gets a second term, it's a nightmare, just in terms of what happens to your mind. If such a corrupt, mad individual is your president for a 10-year period, 8-year period, it must be something really horrible. Any case.
Hello, is the microphone working? Yes. Okay, good. Thanks very much, Doctor. I agree with you completely, except for one thing. I disagree completely. You say Afrikaners and blacks can never be liberals. Well, starting off with Afrikaners, they're probably got the biggest liberal tradition of any people on earth. For 2 centuries, while the Velddrif was escaping from the British, escaping from the Dutch, they were deep, deep liberals. They never had a king. They're the closest to the classless society that there's ever been. They had their Volksrats and their votes and everything like that, within their own ranks. I'm not talking about how they treated other people. The Boer republics were deeply liberal. They lost it when they got power over the whole land. So the Boers, Afrikaners are natural liberals and could easily revert to it again. As for the blacks, just to take one example, which is affirmative action. So the liberal position is there should be no affirmative action. All appointments should be on merits. Now, if you said to ordinary blacks, ordinary black voters, who would you prefer to teach your children? An affirmative action teacher's appointed on skin color, or just the best teacher available? What would they answer? If you said who for your municipality, the engineer in charge of your sanitation and your waterworks, who would you prefer? An affirmative action engineer or one promoted on merit? What do you think they'd say?
Yeah, I get that argument. I remember when I was desperately fighting to get Eugene de Kock out of jail. They keep on calling these families that he has done harm to, and then they say he must make peace with them. And then he tells them what they want to hear, probably, and they, in some other way, tell him what they want him to believe. And I said at the time, but I don't think you do anything for justice by calling in the families of the victims and expecting them to, in some other way, reach form of agreement. Because they tell you, it's got nothing, they have a vested interest in say something very specific. If I ask you, listen man, you're black and you're poor, you don't have water, who must give the water? You, of course you will say, the best man must, I just want water, I know. But that's when you have a vested interest. But when people go out and vote in elections, that doesn't count. Then they vote in terms of ideology, narrative, fears, in-groups, out-groups. There's a different dynamic when people vote. So in terms of voting, let me just refine what I'm saying so that I can agree with you without confessing that I agree with you. In terms of people's voting behavior, that type of dynamic, it doesn't work like that. And our future is subjected to how people vote in South Africa. And the Afrikaners, why I think, call them conservative, but I still have to see an Afrikaner that don't puke when you call him a liberal. So, except you. But call them conservative if you want to. But just remember, if you isolate yourself in terms of in-groups and out-groups, and that's how they survived all their lives. They isolated themselves in in-groups and out-groups. If you do that, I can't think of you as a liberal, because liberals don't do that. They don't have that strict in-group, out-group conditions. Somebody else?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Dr. Croucamp, right in front of you. Is there, in the current discourse about you know, the sort of move towards pragmatism, is there a distinction being made between restitution and redistribution? Because I think most libertarians and liberals would, or should, make that distinction. Restitution is a matter of fairness, and as you say, the land was stolen, give it back. Whereas redistribution is a very different story. Yeah. You know, now you're dealing with a situation where you actually do legitimately own the land. You want to take it away in order to give it to someone who doesn't have the land and you think ought to, on the basis of their skin color or whatever.
Yeah, in terms of the whole process in the law in South Africa, they make that distinction. And redistribution is how many black people own the land in a number of years' time, vis-a-vis how many white people own it. And restitution got mainly to do with land, say, for instance, that was a long time ago. The land claims process plays on the restitution part. In other words, we know that a specific, call it a tribe, if you wish, anthropologically, lived here in the past, and now we buy the farms back and we restore their presence in that particular area again. So the law makes provision for both those processes, but the one that I think that's the politically contentious one is the redistribution one. Even the white people don't mind for a moment that land where black people lived is being bought and given back to them by the state, because that's a process that's legitimately going on now. But there's a new argument that we're not talking about that. We're talking about land ownership generally. We should take the land from white people. And one day, you can't believe how the death threats I got from Afrikaners on RSG. One day said, why don't we just say we stole the land and get it over and done with, us white people? Because if we as white people agree and confess and be honest that we stole the land, if we don't, you know who's paying the price? The farmers. Because they go after the farmer's land now. They don't say white people, they say the farmer stole the land. The farmer must lose his land. We want to take the farm from the white farmer. But if we collectively say, yes, okay, we stole the land, then we have some sort of an agreement, the same way that Dan Crick had the agreement with the president when he confessed that something injustice has happened, and let's find a pragmatic way of resolving the thing. And when the president went to Alexandra and he said, I would like to broaden ownership, I knew at that moment that he bought into Dan Crick's suggestion, let's find a pragmatic way of solving this problem. Because you cannot solve it ideologically. But a new compromise will have to be formulated, manufactured in some other way. Listen, I can see most of you are really bored. Some of you are even sleeping. The brandy and Coke is waiting.
Not bored.
If there's one more question. Two more questions. Okay.
Then we'll let you go. Although we lock the doors, huh?
Okay, good.
I'm glad about that. I never thought that I will admit it, but I actually agree with only one thing that you said.
Good.
I actually forgot what it was, but forget about that. The second thing, no, it's not that Article 2.3, whatever you mentioned, it's Article 2.3.3. Not forgetting Article 2.3.1 and 2.3.5, which becomes incredibly important in terms of international law.
Yeah.
What worries me is that you might go into politics one day. Please don't. And I'm serious about it. Why? Because you talk here as if we must all accept that we did steal the land. If we can have one example of where land was stolen and not repatriated or given back or whatever in the past 25 years, I would like to see it. I think everybody would like to see it. So I think we must get away from the idea to get into people's head that we did steal land. We didn't. In fact, the land I have, I didn't steal, I worked for it. I didn't inherit it, I paid for it. First with a bond, and then I finished the bond. So it's very obvious that if the government wants to take that land, and I'm taking myself as an example of many people in South Africa, there will be a fight. So we must accept, if we want to fight for our land, it doesn't make us, and I'm not a flip base fan, doesn't make us flip-base right-wing people. Not at all. It makes us people that worked for what we have. Not talked and got it through bullshit like a lot of the ANC people. So I'd like you to give us your official, on camera, idea of, did we steal all this land? Because this is what you're saying. We stole the land and we must admit it.
Yeah.
Dan Creek must admit it. Louis Meintjes must admit it.
Yeah.
That we stole the land and now we must give it back. Because now who must give it back and who mustn't give it back?
No, wait. Don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say we must give it back. That's not what I'm saying.
But you said we stole it.
Okay, good. Okay, the fact is that you're a member of an audience, and I talk to people, and you say I, in some other way, coerced them into thinking like me. That's bullshit. I didn't.
That is
okay,
part of what is.
Yeah, but that's.
Any speaker.
Listen, don't underestimate their intelligence. Maybe there's a mistake you make, but they don't make that intelligent.
That is the job of a speaker.
Yeah, that's not the job of a speaker. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I don't care. Fuck if you don't believe me. I don't really care. I couldn't care less whether you believe me or not. I'm not interested in what you think. I couldn't care less what you think. Wait. Let me just finish. Let me just. Wait. Ek is nie 'n joernalis nie. I can we just answer him? Okay. Let me first. Let me just answer him.
Okay, guys. Okay, please.
I didn't want to start a fight, by the way. I just wanted to answer.
Libertarians are supposed to be civil. It's not.
I just want to tell you, these people are not libertarians.
No, they're not. I consider not libertarians.
We're gonna let Piet please.
Okay. First of all,
let Piet respond with no comments thereafter. We're gonna do one more question respectfully, then we're gonna have to call it quit. Not because we want to walk away from the debate. Unfortunately, you have to fly back at 5 o'clock, etc. But please keep it civil. We're all.
if I didn't offend you, I would have been so terribly disappointed. First of all, wait, just relax, man. Just relax. I can give you the mic and then I go, because you seem to want to speak on your own. Okay, so what I'm saying is, why I say I don't care what you think is that I really don't care what people think. I am very interested in how they think about things. That's much more interesting, how people think about things. It's not very interesting what they think, because they can sell an idea which they inherited from their forefathers, and I don't care about that. But if they package it in an interesting, comparative, analytical way, I think, oh, well, that's an interesting way to think. I sometimes disagree with people, and then I still think, but it's a very interesting way of arguing the point. So I'm not here, I don't want to convince you to think like me. But I must remind you that there's a significant percentage of people out there, there's a conversation, there's a discourse, there's a narrative out there which says that we stole the land. Wait, and we in some other way will have to deal with it. So my argument is, how do we deal with it? We deal with it by being pragmatic, because I can tell you now, you can pick up your gun, but you will lose this time. There is no room for white minorities picking up guns in South Africa. It's gone. And by the way, it is also not our mindset. If we would have done that or could have done it, we would have done that in 1994. We know that through over 350 years, we got a lot farther by negotiating, reaching compromises. That's why we are where we are, because of our ability to create a new platform that we renegotiate, reach a new compromise, and be better off. That's why people that look like you are the most successful identities in Africa, by far. Why? Because you know when to shoot and when to compromise. And the last 25 years, compromises stood us in good stead. So if I say, just to answer you, if I say we stole the land, first of all, there's a narrative out there which you can wish away if you want to, but it's not going to go away. You have to deal with it. And the second thing is, if black South Africans say to me, the Group Areas Act, the labor, the homeland policies, those constitute a form of theft. I might disagree with them, but it's going to be a long argument. because they might just have a good point too. It's not, I can't just wipe it off the table. And I know that you bought your farm. I also farm sheep. I didn't steal anybody's farm, I didn't steal anything, and I bought my farm. I never stole a sheep from anybody. But that's not what we talk about. That's why I said on RSG one day, if white people confess that over 300 years, black people lost their land because of government policies, because of policies that we instituted, if we just confess that, it's going to take nothing away from us. But it will allow us to reach a new compromise, which will allow us to own the land. In the same way when Dan Crick said to the president, I in some other way confess that there was an injustice and I take responsibility for hold on to it. In the same words he said to the president, if you take my farm, there's no way in which I can assist to deal with what has happened in the past. I cannot help anybody. I want to, but I need to keep my farm to do that. If white South Africans want to keep their farms, or farmers, not white South, if farmers want to keep their farms, it's time that the rest of us stepped up to the plate and say, yes, we take moral obligation for what has happened in the past. That will allow us to, you may think you will lose your farm as a consequence. If I say, yes, in the past the land was so, no, good, just give it back then. No. That is the perfect justification for the new compromise which will allow you to keep your farm. Thank you very much.